Today's review is for the new Hellboy reboot, directed by Neil Marshall and starring David Harbour, Milla Jovovich, Ian McShane, Sasha Lane, and Daniel Day-Kim, and is a re-adaptation of the Hellboy comics as well as a reboot of the Guillermo del Toro directed movies. And in this rebooted adaptation, which bases its story primarily off the Wild Hunt, the Blood Queen, aka Namu, aka just the Queen of Blood, is awakened and is about to bring her reign of terror upon the earth. And of course, Hellboy, with the help of Alice Monaghan and Ben Diamio, all have to stop her from coating the entire earth with blood. Now look, I wasn't one of those geeks on the internet who was just taking a look at the marketing of this movie and just being like, oh man, this movie is definitely gonna suck hard. I mean, trust me, I wasn't. I mean, when I saw the first trailer, I didn't think it was that great, sure, but although I did think the second trailer was a little better. Even though the marketing wasn't all that great, I was still hoping that maybe the movie could still be somewhat okay. And I was hoping that David Harbour could pull off being a good Hellboy in the footsteps of Ron Perlman. Like, believe me guys, I saw potential in this movie. I really did. And I was definitely willing to give it a chance. And obviously, this film is definitely inferior to the Del Toro-Perlman duology. But was it at least fine? Well, no. Now, look, because of how angry I am with this movie, I'm not even going to talk about the attempts at comic book accuracy this film tries to go at. Because, honestly, this might be one of the most soulless and most just flat-out uncharacterful reboots I've ever seen, with an absolutely confusing story and a very uninteresting cast of characters. Neil Marshall's Hellboy just comes off as basically the 2018 Predator of Hellboy. Yes, I said that, as if 2018's Predator wasn't trash enough. Okay, now look, to be fair, I will point out a few little positives that I do kind of want to address. For one thing, this film does have a decent amount of some really good practical effects, as they are easily the best special effects in this whole film, because it really does look pretty amazing. And also, I also want to talk about what could have been a fantastic idea if it were used more in the movie, and that is Tom Hayden Church as Lobster Johnson. Now, the only thing about him that sucks at all is that he's only in one little scene in this whole movie. He basically makes it like a cameo. But this one scene with him was easily the best part of this whole movie. Even with just a few little lines that he has, Church really does show his potential being a great live-action Lobster Johnson. He probably could have been one of the few things that could have saved this film from being trash if he had more scenes. But he only had one, so it doesn't really do good enough. Now, that's pretty much it, because everything else is just... honestly, it's either just playing not too great or just like full-on garbage. Like, Ian McShane's portrayal of Professor Broom is depicted as less of a kind-hearted researcher who worries about his adopted son and deeply cares for him, and more of a stern, cuss-spitting killer who only claims to care about Hellboy, but sometimes it's implied even by Hellboy himself that his relationship with his son has actually been a bad father-son relationship. At one point in the movie, he even tells Hellboy to stop whining like a grumpy father, trying to teach his son to be a hunter and get him to shoot an animal he doesn't want to shoot. And that is just so out of character for him. Broom in both the comics and the Del Toro movies was written way better than this. Like, in both of those, he was a soft old man who actually showed genuine fatherly care for Hellboy as a child. And even in his adult years, he worried about him and still loved him to consider him a true son. In the second film, he even raised him a bedtime story. And that's something I bet this Broom never ever did. Heck, most of his interactions with Hellboy are just, for the most part, a lot of arguing. There's only really like one scene between the two that actually has them interacting somewhat nicely. But it doesn't come off as a father-son bond. It just comes off as them just kind of talking like friends. This Broom just comes off as a total waste. And it just proves that I was absolutely right about him when I reviewed the original Hellboy movie, that he could not top John Hurt's performance. And I was right. I mean, Don't get me wrong. I understand they have to differentiate themselves from the Del Toro movies, and I'm guessing they thought that this was the best way they could have gone. And yeah, maybe a more funny and less as overly serious Professor Broom could have worked if he didn't come off as such a jerk. I hated this portrayal of Broom. He sucked. Also, Mila Jovovich as Namu was basically a cartoon in this movie. In this movie, she was just literally portrayed as like a cartoon character. Half the time, she's always just spitting out cliche evil witch dialogue and just hamming it up to 11 with that obviously fake accent of hers. Like, at one point in the film, she's even giving a massive speech on a hilltop to a bunch of monsters, and I laughed. I'm not even kidding. It was too much. Not to mention the insane amount of gore and bloodshed. Now, look, I know I said earlier that I wouldn't talk about the attempts at comic book accuracy because it doesn't because look, being more faithful to the comics doesn't automatically save this movie from being a disaster, okay? I mean, sure, there are going to be things from the comics that fans of the comics will definitely recognize. I can assure you on that. But let me address this one thing. Look, the comics, yeah, the comics, they definitely had more blood than the Del Toro movies did. Because those movies, they were PG-13, so they couldn't show too much real blood splattering or intestines spewing out or anything like that. And because of how much they're trying to be much more like the comics than those movies, supposedly, they definitely went for a more hard R rating. But honestly, I'm going to be honest. For a reason that I didn't know up until now, I actually didn't mind that in the old films. Now, at the time, I didn't exactly know why I didn't mind. But it was only when I saw this movie and came out of it that I finally find out why I didn't mind about that back then. And you want to know why that is? Because the insane amount of gore in this movie that this film attempts is just plain gratuitous. This film tries so hard to really show off a lot of somewhat shocking carnage, like giant beings of destruction rising from massive craters and just like snatching thousands of innocent people up and just tearing them to shreds. But honestly, it wasn't even shocking. It was just something I'd imagine out of a bad horror movie. No wonder the Del Toro movies didn't do this, because I probably would have ruined those movies, as endless amounts of gore are just one of the things in the comics that don't exactly work too well in movies, especially due to how bad the CGI in this movie is. And that's another thing. The CGI in this movie was just absolutely embarrassing. Like, there's a part where a character gets their eye shot out, and you see it hanging from their eye socket, and it looks like an effect out of The Mummy Returns. It was terrible. And this last real gripe I want to discuss, before I talk about it, I just want to say I'm sorry I'm sorry for even wanting to say this, but look, I'm going to be honest. I really wasn't into David Harbour's performance as Hellboy himself. I mean, he wasn't terrible or anything, but let me explain. You see, throughout the film, you could tell that he really is trying to be a good Hellboy. From what I've heard, he has read the comics, and he did seem to be really excited to play the role. But he just didn't really seem to fit in the role in the actual movie. He tries so hard to capture the same charm and charisma, which Ron Perlman did perfectly, but he honestly just doesn't really succeed all that well. My least favorite thing about him was his voice. I mean, sometimes it does fit fine enough. However, there are also a few times where it just sounds like his mouth was still full from eating one of those Taco Bell quesadillas he probably put in his mouth right before they started shooting most of his scenes. It was stupid. So yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Harbour, but for all your efforts, you just couldn't pull it off. Hellboy without Ron Perlman is basically Wolverine without Hugh Jackman. David was basically the Val Kilmer Batman of Hellboy. It was just not good enough. So yes, the Hellboy reboot sucked. It relies way too much on trying to be a faithful comic book adaptation while not really focusing enough on a proper story, not giving us characters that we could actually really like, excessive amounts of violence that gets way too boring after a while, and pretty much just makes me want to watch the original Del Toro Perlman movies over and over, again and again and again and again and again until I'm dead, just so I could wash all the bad taste out of my mouth. This movie was made by people who I'm sure really were trying, but their efforts just couldn't make it worth it. I'm sure that maybe some other people will like this movie, but me, I just didn't. At all. I'm going to give Hellboy a 1 out of 10. And yes, I will absolutely say it again. The Del Toro-Perlman duology was better. Infinity War times better. Anyways, that was my review, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'll see you next time on whatever review I do next. And, yeah. Peace out.